Today's scripture is taken from the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verse 1 to 14. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he has spoken will be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the detachment of soldiers with his commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be. Let us encourage Dr. Leow, who will bring us the second sermon of the new reality.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. It is a real privilege for me to come here to preach to you on this Holy Week. I was here yesterday evening at the Maundy Thursday service, and I'm so happy to be able to be with you today again on Good Friday. Yesterday, I explained the theme of our sermon series, which is a new reality. I mentioned that our world constantly drums into us a certain picture of what is real. Our world tells us who we are, what is important, what is life all about. But because as Christians we know that we live in a fallen world, a world that is afflicted by sin, the picture that the world presents is a corrupted one. It is false in many ways. When Jesus came from heaven to this earth, he brought not only salvation for us, but he also brought us a new reality. As we look at his life, as we listen to his teachings, as we read about what his apostles said about him, we see a new picture of what is real. Who are we? What is life all about? What are the truly important things? Jesus gives very different answers from those given by the world. And so, my friends, in this sermon series, we want to examine how in the final week of Jesus' life on this earth, there was a major clash between the two realities, the reality of Jesus and the reality of this world. Last night, we looked at the shocking episode of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, and we saw the clash in how we understand the notions of shame and glory. Today, with God's help, we want to look at the clash in the way we understand the notions of weakness and strength. And on Easter Sunday, we will look into the clash in our understanding of death and resurrection. Let us focus today on how weakness and power, or weakness and strength, are understood differently by the two realities. Our scripture passage this morning, read by Jensen, is the first 14 verses of John chapter 18. John chapters 18 and 19 cover all the major events of that first Good Friday. These two chapters start by describing Jesus' arrest. That was the portion that was read for us. But the two chapters go on to talk about the trial of Jesus before the Jewish council. It talks about the 3 denials of the apostle Peter. It talks about Jesus being brought before Pontius Pilate. It talks about how he was sentenced to death. Chapter 19 ends by describing the crucifixion of Jesus, how he gave up his spirit on the cross, and his burial in the tomb. When we look at these two chapters of John's Gospel and the major events on that first Good Friday, this theme of weakness and power comes out very clearly. We don't have the time today to look at how this theme, is traced through all these events. We will restrict ourselves this morning to explore how weakness and power is being manifested in the episode of Jesus' arrest. But I hope that all of us in the course of today will find some time to read John chapters 18 and 19 in full and carry out our own exploration of how weakness and power are depicted on that first Good Friday. When we look at the passage for us today, the first 14 verses of John 18, it seems at first sight that all the power belonged to Jesus' enemies. It seemed at first sight that Jesus and his apostles were weak and helpless against their opponents who have all the resources on their side. Firstly, we read that the enemies of Jesus had secured a major advantage by recruiting a spy. This was not an ordinary spy, but it was someone in the innermost circle of Jesus, a member of the 12 apostles. Somehow, through their meticulous scheming, the Jewish authorities had managed to persuade Judas Iscariot to betray his master. Judas agreed that he would inform the authorities of the best time to arrest him when Jesus was alone with his apostles without the crowd being present. Judas would even lead the authorities to where Jesus was, because as a member of the inner circle, he knew where Jesus would go frequently. As chapter 18 verse 2 tells us, he knew all of Jesus' habits. He knew that Jesus would be in the garden that night. But the enemies of Jesus did not only manage to penetrate Jesus' innermost circle, they also had manpower and military might on their side. Again, through their meticulous planning, the Jewish authorities somehow managed to secure a detachment of Roman soldiers for their service. A detachment in the Roman army could consist of as many as 600 soldiers. And joining them in the hunt for Jesus were the officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. And this large group of people, as verse 3 tells us, were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. So just try to imagine the scene with me. There was this huge group of people, a few hundred well-trained and battle-hardened Roman soldiers, armed to the teeth with their spears and their swords, accompanied by another large group of Jewish officials. This whole group were carrying lanterns and torches. You can imagine this huge area will be lit up in the dark night. This formidable hunting party didn't really have to search for their prey because there was someone among them who can tell them exactly where to go. My friends, in this situation, what chance did Jesus and his few disciples have against such overwhelming power? Jesus looks like this poor, weak, helpless victim about to fall prey to the meticulous schemes and formidable power of his enemies. This might be the first impression when we look at the account of Jesus' arrest. But if you look at our passage more carefully, we suddenly start to see a different picture. What we see firstly in verse 4 of our passage is that Jesus actually knew very well all that was going to happen to him. This is consistent with what we read earlier in John chapter 13, verse 1, where John tells us, Jesus knew the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. So Jesus already knew. He knew about the betrayal of Judas. He knew beforehand about this army of people coming to arrest him. He knew everything, but he didn't try to hide somewhere or to flee to another place. He knew everything, but he still went to the garden, the place where Judas knew he would go. Jesus was not caught by surprise by the arresting party. In fact, as our passage tells us, he expected them and he boldly went out to meet them. Face to face with this formidable, group of people, we read in our passage that Jesus asked them the same question twice. Who is it that you want? The Jewish officials answered twice, Jesus of Nazareth. And all this was to accomplish Jesus' purpose. Because once it came out of their mouth that they were only looking for Jesus, the Jewish authorities were forced to let the disciples go. They couldn't arrest the disciples because they already said they only wanted to arrest Jesus. And so the prophecy was fulfilled. Jesus had not lost any that the Father had given him. Round one of the contest was won by Jesus. His disciples could go free. There's another detail in our passage which shows clearly who held the real power in this encounter. The first time that the arresting party answered that they were looking for Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus answered, I am he. And when the army of people heard this, they drew back and they fell to the ground, as verse 6 tells us. Why did this strange thing happen? When Jesus declared, "I am He," the original Greek has the words ego eimi, and this can be translated as simply, "I am." Jesus was telling the army of people arresting him, "I am." For those of us who are familiar with the Old Testament, when we hear the word "I am," we straight away remember the encounter between Moses and God in the book of Exodus, when Moses met God in the burning bush. Moses, in that episode, boldly asked for God's name. "What is your name, Lord?" And God told him, "I am who I am. You are to say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" And this name of God, "I am," is rendered ego eimi, those Greek words in the Greek translation of the Old Testament. When Jesus said to the arresting party, "I am," he was declaring, the one you have come to arrest is the God who appeared to Moses. "I am the God of Israel. I am the Lord of heaven and earth." It was no wonder that the arresting party drew back and fell to the ground. Jesus spoke his true identity, the second member of the Holy Trinity, the Almighty God himself, who has come to us as a human being. The power of this declaration was so great that even the battle-hardened soldiers could not withstand it and fell to the ground. My friends, when we look at the episode of Jesus' arrest, who really is truly powerful and who is truly weak? The reality of the world tells us it is those who have the brilliant schemes, it is those who have the huge resources who are in control. It is the Jewish authorities, it is the formidable detachment of soldiers that are powerful. But when we look beneath the surface, we realize that things are not as they seem. It was, in fact, the weak and helpless Jesus who held all the power. He was not taken by surprise, and he could not have been arrested if he did not permit it to happen. All the meticulous schemes of the Jewish authorities, all the power and might of the Roman soldiers, all the treachery of Judas Iscariot were actually all part of Jesus' plan. All these people were just pawns in the hands of Jesus, the truly powerful one. My friends, this theme of a reversal in our understanding of weakness and power continues for the rest of John chapters 18 and 19. So, for example, when you look at Jesus before Pontius Pilate, the first impression we may get is that Pilate is the judge and Jesus is the one being judged. But read that episode carefully and see whether you can detect a sudden and complete reversal of roles. Again, when you read about the crucifixion and death of Jesus, John makes it clear that it was that weak and helpless Jesus hanging on the cross that actually has ultimate power and authority. On that cross, that helpless Jesus was the one guiding every event to the conclusion that he wanted, to the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. And so, my friends, I hope we can find some time today on this Good Friday to look through these 2 chapters of John, and we see more clearly that things are not as they seem. The powerful and the weak are actually not who we think they are. My friends, as we look around in our world today, it is very easy to become discouraged, and I myself have been terribly discouraged many times. Those who do evil and bring suffering and death to the innocent in so many places in our world can do so with impunity because they are just so powerful. Who dares to speak up against them? Who dares to challenge them? Just look at what is happening in our world today in places like Myanmar, in Ukraine, in Gaza, in the African nation of Sudan. The people who freely and liberally pour out suffering and death on the innocent have all the resources on their side. They have the money, they have the manpower, they have all the weapons that they need. And in contrast, their victims appear so weak and helpless. They cannot do anything but to endure constant bombardments. They just mourn and grieve their loved ones one after another. They are forced to flee from place to place. They have to endure cold and starvation. And more recently, as we read the news reports, we encounter yet another episode of global injustice. We discover that one man has this power to throw the whole world's trading system into disarray. One man can grind economic growth for the world to a halt. He can cause businesses to fail, people to lose their jobs, and millions of people to have to suffer poverty and joblessness. How can so much power be given to one man to wreak so much havoc? Why are the rest of us so weak and helpless that we just have to sit there and bear the consequences of his actions even though we have done nothing wrong? But of course, evil and injustice is not only present in the nations of the world, not only present in the global situation. Evil and injustice also strikes us where we are. All over, we see people being mistreated, bullied, and discriminated against. It could be our workplaces, that colleague of ours who's always being picked on. It could be our schools. It could even be in our homes. But we cannot seem to do anything about it because the power is in the hands of those who bully. They have the money, they have the resources, they are the bosses, they are the leaders. They have the strength in numbers. The victims can only suffer in silence. They are so weak and helpless. There's nothing that anyone can do about it. My friends, it is truly not easy to bear with the reality in our world today. We see the good being persecuted and suffering. We see the evil rejoicing in their power, in their might. And some of us might be so sick and tired of being weak and helpless that we might be tempted to do something about it. We might be tempted to respond like the Apostle Peter in our passage today. In our passage, Peter couldn't really understand the new reality brought by Jesus. Peter was, I think, very sick and tired of being weak and helpless, of people in authority always persecuting them and abusing them, and I think Peter couldn't take it anymore. In our passage, we read that Peter took out the sword that he was carrying, and verse 10 tells us he cut off the ear of a member of the arresting party called Malchus. Now, you must remember that Peter was a fisherman. Okay. He was not the skilled swordsman that we see in the Kung Fu movies, okay, where he take out the sword and then cut off the ears with a death stroke as a warning, don't mess with me. Okay. Peter was not so skillful with the sword. Peter cut off the ear of Malchus because actually he was aiming for the head. Okay. He was out for the kill, but he missed, therefore he cut off the ear. Okay. That was Peter's response to what happened that night. My friends, what Peter did that night was not the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is not to return evil for evil. The way of Jesus is not to try to struggle with our enemies to seize that worldly power for ourselves and then use it, to take revenge on them. The way of Jesus is to put our trust in the new reality. And my friends, in this new reality, things are not as they seem. Real power is not with those who do evil, but is in fact with those who are on God's side, who do what is right and pleasing to God, who remain faithful to God even in the midst of great suffering. Outwardly, these people are defeated. Outwardly, these people are humiliated, and the plans of the evildoers succeed again and again. But on a deeper level, God is still in control. He's not absent. He has not abandoned us. He's still there in the background, holding everything in His sovereign hands, guiding events towards the end that He has set for us. My friends, when we follow Jesus and do what is right, we have this power that the world cannot see. Because in the last day at the end, it will suddenly be revealed to everyone that we were in the winning side all along. At the end, when the new reality is fully unfolded, the people who will stand with Jesus are the weak, the helpless, the humiliated, the defeated, and the murdered. We will stand together with Jesus as those who are vindicated. At the end, on the last day, God will declare to the whole of creation, these are the people who are in the right. These are the people who have chosen the right paths. These are my people, the people who will have the final victory. And then those evildoers who appear to be so strong and high and mighty in the world's reality will then be revealed on the last day as being utterly weak and defeated. From the very start, they never had a chance at all. And in the end, they will receive God's righteous judgment as God comes and makes sure that everything will finally be put right. My friends, the reality of our world is truly very discouraging. Some of us may have tried to put things right, We try to speak up for the people who are bullied. We try to even confront the bosses, for those in power, to speak the truth. But we had to suffer for it. We were punished for it, and nothing seems to change. Things are very discouraging in the reality of our world. How much power the evildoers have, and how weak and helpless are those whom they are oppressing. Some of us are even tempted to be like Peter, If this is the game, why don't I play it? Why don't I also seize power for myself and then use it to revenge those who have mistreated us, to wreak vengeance on them, and to put things right in my own strength? But my friends, on this Good Friday, let us just pause for a while. Let us allow that first Good Friday 2,000 years ago to open our eyes to see a very different picture. Because in the new reality brought by Jesus, things are not as they seem on the surface. And so, my friends, as we remember that first Good Friday, may we get encouragement again to continue to do what is right, to continue to stand up for those who are bullied and those who are weak and helpless, in not giving up in our prayer for God's righteousness to be fulfilled, even though it may seem so fruitless and hopeless at this point in time. May we cling on tightly to the promise of Jesus when he says, "Blessed are you who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for you will be filled." May we wait patiently for God's new reality to be unfolded at the very end, when it will finally be made clear to the whole of creation who are truly the weak ones and who are the truly powerful. My friends, will we let that first Good Friday infuse God's new reality in us as we struggle with the evil and injustices of our world?